Okay. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and all interested parties. On behalf of the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence and the GIGA Institute, I would like to welcome you to the public online discussion today. We are very happy that some of the preliminary informal discussions between Alexander Stroh-Steckelberg from the cluster and the GIGA have eventually led to this event. Both institutes are associated with the keywords Africa and policy research, among others, but both aim to facilitate science transfer into politics with theoretical and praxis-oriented approaches. We hope that today's event will be an overture to further collaboration and that we might like to identify joint topics for teamwork. Besides the networking factor, we are excited to present a highly current topic today, and for that we have assembled great expertise on the channel and the panel. So before I hand over to the chair, Professor Paula Schrode, some housekeeping. The event will be recorded. If you don't want to be seen, please turn off the camera. And we have limited the chat. That means you can only use the hand raising functions for your questions and answers. So I hope, without further ado, I will hand over to the chair. Lean back, enjoy the afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Doris, for this introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good to have so many people here interested in this panel this afternoon. So, yeah, I have the honor to substitute our colleague Alexander Stroh-Steckelberg, or to try and substitute him as the chair for the session. First of all, I would like to introduce all guests for this session, as you see on the slide right now, their names. So first, we will have a contribution by Damaris Passitau. So the order of this event is that in the beginning we have 3 research inputs, and then we have 2 responses, followed by a general discussion with all participants, where you are also allowed to join in. So first, we will have a contribution by Damaris Passitau, and I apologize for probably not pronouncing your names correctly.
That's
so, okay. Damaris Passitau is a social scientist and senior lecturer in religion and gender studies at Egerton University in Kenya, and she's also president of the African Association for the Study of Religion in Africa and its Diaspora. Then there will be a presentation by Erik Stollenberg. He's a political scientist working at the German Institute for Global and Area Studies in Hamburg, at the Institute for African Studies, for African Affairs, it is called, I think. He's also part of a project that aims at developing policy recommendations. The third input will be by my colleague Eva Spies, professor for the study of religion with focus on Africa at the University of Bayreuth, and also principal investigator at the African Multiple Cluster of Excellence at the University of Bayreuth. Then we have 2 responses. First one from Nabila Farouk-Matthews, scholar in Islamic Studies and project leader at the German GIZ, Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit. And the second one from Daniel Salau-Roguet, scholar at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. We start with the 3 inputs, and as you will see, they come from very different research backgrounds in terms of methodology, as well as research questions, theoretical frameworks. But I'm sure this will provide a good foundation for stimulating discussion with different perspectives. As I said, the inputs will then be followed by the 2 responses, with the possibility for the speakers to react to these responses. And then finally, we open the general discussion where the audience is invited to join. Yeah, my own job in the following will basically be to watch the time. So each speaker has 8 to 10 minutes. I will give you a sign after 8 minutes. That means you will have 2 more minutes, and then yeah, I will have to make you stop. Okay, so yeah, I'm looking forward to your contributions, and I invite you, Damaris Passitau, to start. The floor is yours.
Danke. Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to try to share my screen. Yeah, I think it's coming. So once again, thank you, everyone, and to the organizers for this opportunity. Today, I'm just going to share with you some of my latest policy research on faith-based actors and girls' education in Kenya. And what I'm going to share about is based on two important things for me. One is that I'm an actor. I am girls' education, a thought leader in girls' education. I run my own non-profit organization called Let Masai Girls Learn in Kenya, which is an organization that I created to support vulnerable girls to go to school. And you can find that information on my website if it is running. I haven't checked it in a few weeks. The other one is based, some of what I'm going to say, which is really basically conversational, is based on a policy research study that I did for the Center for Reproductive Health, for Reproductive Rights, an organization, a human rights organization based in Nairobi and Washington, D.C. And I undertook a study in 8 African countries during the lockdown, doing Zoom conversations with main actors, faith-based actors and human rights actors and feminists and gender rights actors in 8 different countries in Africa. And I wanted to understand the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on women. And I zeroed in on girls' education and the kind of conversation that has been taking place in Kenya since the lockdown. The Kenyan government locked up the country on the 25th of March 2020, just immediately the COVID pandemic emerged. And that also meant that schools were closed for a very long time, and within a very short time, just a very significantly high number of teenage girls across the country, but mainly in rural areas and in vulnerable communities, fell pregnant. And that in itself generated tremendous conversation between policymakers, parents, and faith-based organizations and actors.
Excuse me, may I just, you wanted to show slides, I think?
I wanted to show slides, yeah, and then it didn't look like it came, and now I think I'm just going to forget about the slides. But if anyone is interested with the slides, I'm happy to share that with everyone. So faith-based organizations and faith actors are really important interlocutors in sustainable development, particularly in Africa, where faith or religion is critically important, and that it also affect people's lives and public life. Religion, faith-based organizations are always, colliding together with, very publicly in many African countries, and Kenya is not an exception. At the same time, we also know that faith-based actors are becoming increasingly influential in policy issues, whether that is politics or social issues or just a wide range of policy, social, religious, economic, and political issues. And religious actors in my country especially are really huge stakeholders in education itself. Much of the best schools in the country, the best universities, the best hospitals and clinics are faith-based. They are owned by churches, they are owned by faith-based organizations. That simply means that when it comes to policy issues, development issues, faith-based actors are critical, important actors when it comes to discussions around health and education. And religious actors, particularly from mainline churches, but also from newer churches, Pentecostal and charismatic churches, where that's my biggest strength. That's where I locate my research, are having real impact on spiritual issues and gender questions, and clergy try to morph their teachings into women bodies, what happens to girls, bodies and sexuality, and trying actually to discipline, sexuality and sexual citizenship, for that matter. And I discussed that with Adrian Van Klinken in one of our journal articles. And so they are using that. They are using their power because they are powerful stakeholders in development, in education sector, in the health sector. They are using that to increasingly assert conservative ideologies and conservative teachings onto public policy. And I'll just give a few examples of the things that really struck me in my research, but also through participant observation throughout the lockdown and even before. When schools closed, there was this tremendous outcry in the country. There was an increase of teenage pregnancy, which has been happening for a very long time. But it seems to me that teenage pregnancy numbers went quite high during the lockdown. We also had a lot of gender-based violence. We had lots of sexual violations, rape, and that sort of thing. And what was striking for me is how religious actors shape ideas around teenage pregnancy and around what was happening around education issues, and how they continue to perpetuate gender norms and inequality, including women bodies. So this afternoon I discuss 3 areas in which I felt that faith actors are really having a real impact on the area of a number of issues: teenage pregnancy, comprehensive sexuality, safe abortion and reproductive health technologies, and also LGBTI rights, which is like sort of taboo to mention here. And so this work is based on evidence-based. I have lots of data, and I said I could share that with everyone, the numbers, the kind of numbers that I was able to find out as to what is happening to girls. But what struck me is that there was just so much politicization, moralization, and spiritualization of teenage pregnancy in Kenya. And this was led by faith actors from the Catholic Church, from the Pentecostal churches, from mainstream churches, and Catholic and Muslim organizations, but also faith-allied lobbies like Catholic doctors, Doctors for Choice. There's also the Kenya Christian Forum. There's the Kenya Christian Lawyers Professional Organizations. Organizations that have really had an impact in the kind of discourses that are taking place in the public sphere. And from a faith point of view, there was moralization. The church opposed, first of all, how they understood teenage pregnancy. They blamed TV, they blamed pornography, they blamed the internet, they blamed parents for teenage pregnancy. And they blamed the girls themselves for being girls of loose morals who are not able to control their sexual urges, and that's why they got pregnant. And I found that particularly problematic. The Minister of Education himself blamed parents for the laxity, not controlling their girls, and the lack of morality in society and the collapse of morals in society. So the government spoke the language of faith-based actors, and parents were blamed, and parents on the other side blamed the government for what was happening to their girls. And so there was this sort of contestation, spiritualization, moralization, and also the politicization of teenage pregnancy. And
you have 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes.
What I found disturbing is that nobody spoke for girls. Nobody spoke about what is really happening. What is the elephant in the room? The elephant in the room is the lack of comprehensive sexuality education. So we have a new constitution, and several organizations have been trying to entrench the establishment of comprehensive sexuality education in Kenya. But faith-based actors have resisted that because they believe that this is going to, create more, moral issues in the country. And during the population conference, the UN Population Conference 20+25 in Nairobi, faith-based organizations mounted serious opposition and actually held an alternative conference to, to agitate against the adoption of comprehensive sexuality education, safe abortion, and LGBT rights. And that conversation, to me, I find that there's just this interesting interface between public policy and faith actors, but also the fact that education has become a spiritual and a moralization issue. And for me, my entry point is the concept of reproductive justice. I want to see people having conversation that centers the challenges that girls face every day in school, and I didn't see that. So I found a contestation, a politicization, a moralization, and just a contest between faith actors, parents, and even teachers and lobbies, but nobody is having conversations about what is right for the girls. And so for me, the concept of reproductive justice is the framework that I think should be able to center the rights of girls and gender equality in Kenya. Sorry, sorry for the short time. I will talk until the cows come home, but thank you.
It was perfect. Thank you very much for your input. Thank you. Yeah, so we can continue immediately with the next input by Erik Stollenberg. Please, the floor is yours.
Hey, perfect. Thank you very much. Before I start with the presentation, I just want to thank the University of Bayreuth and everybody involved in organizing this once more. Since we co-organized this with the GIGA, this was terrific, and I'm very glad we could make this happen. So a big thank you for everybody involved on the organizational side of things. And now I'm gonna try and share a slide with you, and let's see if this works. Just give me a second. Okay, I hope this is visible for everybody in full screen. And those are just a couple of key points, a couple of key takeaways. Since I'm going to be talking about a project that I'm co-heading together with Matthias Basedau at the GIGA, and the project is called Freedom and Development, ? Religious Actors, Freedom of Religion or Belief, and Sustainable Development. And really the motivation behind this project is that we have seen positive developments in the last years and decades of the Sustainable Development Goals or indicators related to the SDGs on the global level. However, we also witness that Sub-Saharan Africa in some respects is lagging behind some of those positive developments. At the same time, we have witnessed that recently freedom of religion or belief, or in short FORB, and religious actors are fairly new, high up on the agenda of many development agencies and international organizations. So the question for us is, to what extent can FORB and religious actors help foster sustainable development in Africa and possibly also beyond? So the findings that I'm going to present to you today are still preliminary, since the project is still up and running until the end of 2023. But both from the quantitative side and from the qualitative side, I think we have some relevant insights already. So the assumption is often on the policy side, more FORB equals more sustainable development, and we want to find out whether there is empirical evidence for that. So looking at the quantitative data that we analyze on the global level, we can say that FORB has increased since the 1940s, but sort of stagnated and even slightly decreased during the last couple of years. At the same time, in Sub-Saharan Africa, we can see a fairly high and stable degree of FORB compared to other world regions. Yet the relationship between FORB and the Sustainable Development Goals that we have considered so far on the project is not clear-cut and not straightforward. So far, we considered the SDGs 3, good health and well-being, 5, gender equality, and 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And we compiled a new global quantitative data set to take a look at how FORB correlates with those SDGs, and the preliminary results suggest that the correlations are fairly heterogeneous. So we found that there is only a weak negative to no correlation between FORB and SDG 3, so health and well-being, that there is a positive but only moderate to weak correlation with gender equality, and that there is a negative, moderate negative to no correlation with both peace and strong and just institutions as two components of SDG 16. However, I want to stress that this evidence that we found on the global level does not necessarily reflect to the same degree on the subnational or the individual level, so more analyses are necessary here. At the same time, the evidence that we've produced so far is rather correlational and should not be overstated with regards to causal effects, and more research, potentially experimental research, for example, is necessary here. What we also found, and this is not very surprising, is that FORB is not the only factor that is correlated with sustainable development. And I'm not going to go into all the details of the alternative explanations that we found to be relevant, but just to give you a couple of examples. For example, the degree of democratization is positively correlated with good health and well-being. GNI per capita is positively correlated with female empowerment and gender equality. And we have factors such as ethnic fractionalization that is negatively correlated with peace, and where statehood or the degree of statehood is positively correlated with just and strong institutions measured, for example, by the rule of law. That's sort of the quantitative findings and the quantitative sides of the project that we've conducted so far. However, we wanted to drill deeper into the subject and also conducted qualitative case studies in Burkina Faso and Eritrea, also in India and Indonesia. But this year, we are also going to continue this work by looking at Sudan and Ethiopia. And the preliminary findings that we've produced so far, mainly in Burkina Faso and Eritrea, is that the scope and the fields of activities for religious actors and faith-based organizations are highly diverse and heterogeneous. So while some focus on the local or regional level in their specific country, others have national impact or even transnational ties and networks. At the same time, the development fields where faith-based organizations are active range tremendously. While some focus exclusively on public health or education, others cover the whole lot, from conflict mediation to food provision to education and public health, to give you just a couple of examples. So this variation needs to be taken into account. What we also found pretty clearly is the ambivalent role of the state when it comes to sustainable development and faith-based organizations. So the state can act both as a development spoiler, when it basically holds back any activities of faith-based organization, as we see in Eritrea, for example. At the same time, the state can be a very valuable and important cooperation partner for faith-based organization, as is happening in many instances in Burkina Faso, for example. So whether the state is cooperative or a spoiler has a high impact on the effectiveness of the development efforts of faith-based organizations. So what we also found furthermore in the qualitative studies is very often faith-based organizations enjoy a high degree of legitimacy among local populations. So the social acceptance of those actors is fairly high, and often higher than that of state institutions, such as the police, for example, which is an important insight to consider when we are seeking to strengthen sustainable development. And those actors with high legitimacy might be more appropriate to provide services to local populations than state institutions, for example. At the same time, we found that there is often a need for balancing the achievements of SDGs versus value-based development policies, because there are clear areas of tension, and Damaris already alluded to some of them. So freedom of belief thinking about blasphemy or conversion, for example, are just two examples where faith-based organizations do not necessarily share the norms and values of Western donors, for example. Not all of them, of course, but this happens sometimes and needs to be taken into account. And the same goes for values of gender equality or the rights of LGBTQIA groups. So to conclude, religious actors are highly diverse and relevant when considering factors such as public health, strong, just institutions and peace, and gender equality. And we're going to do more analyses on other SDGs in the upcoming weeks and months. At the same time, it is pretty clear that the link between FORB and sustainable development is not consistent. So it seems to be rather weak to moderate, which partly challenges the strong emphasis on FORB that international organizations or development agencies have put on it in recent past, which is to say that FORB is an important building block for sustainable development, but it's not the magic key and not the solution to all of the development problems. At the same time, the tensions that are there or can be there between faith-based organizations and the goals of international development agencies need to be taken into account. And the selection of cooperation partners on the ground among faith-based organizations requires comprehensive local knowledge and a comprehensive dialogue between local actors and external international actors. And last not least, the unintended consequences of cooperation should not be underestimated for both faith-based organizations and the international external actors when thinking about regional, national, and local power relationships and the reactions of the population vis-a-vis those possible cooperations. And I think I want to close with a question. So I think what really is important to find out and what I would be interested to discuss with you today, among other things, are the scope conditions under which religious actors can contribute to sustainable development and how we can best promote those scope conditions through external cooperation and external involvement. And I think I'm simply going to stop here, and I'm very much looking forward to questions and comments and the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's exactly 10 minutes. So, yeah, the next speaker is Eva Spieß. I hand over to you, Eva.
Yeah, thank you very much. Eric, would you mind to stop sharing the screen? Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So I will present a different approach, different perspectives, but actually, interestingly, I think we have similar points or conclusions or key points. My statement is based on the work of an ongoing interdisciplinary research project in the framework of the cluster here in Bayreuth. I show you the title here. So do you see the full screen? I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. So, so the title of the project is Religious Engineering, the Making of Moralities, Development and Religion in Niger. And you can see the names of the research group members here. But what I say here is my take on this whole project, of course. So in our ethnographic qualitative research, we take the work of Pentecostal churches, Turkish humanitarian organizations, local Salafi associations and governmental agencies in Niger, as well as national and international development policies as a starting point to study how transformation is imagined and most of all, how is it done. We want to learn more about how certain actors want to transform what they perceive as deficient or unsatisfactory. This way, we look at a wide variety of projects of transformation without categorizing these projects a priori as projects of development or as projects of religious reform. We want to go beyond the discussion about religious actors in development and also consider projects of transformation that are understood as alternatives to Western development or as independent from development discourse altogether. The research project is not about a rejection or an advocacy of a development policy that sees religious actors as relevant in bringing about sustainable development. It rather aims at grasping also those practices of transformation that do not usually fall within the scope of international development. There are for sure advantages in supporting religious actors. However, our approach reveals also certain flaws in the promotion of religious actors in national or international development approaches and policies, and challenges which may be involved in the cooperation with religious actors. Of course, Damaris and Eric also mentioned these already. The central question for me seems to be what is actually the aim of such a cooperation? And I would like to make 5 points in this regard. The first refers a little bit of the development policy of the previous German government and the development cooperation with the focus on religious actors in development. And we categorize this as a kind of form of religious engineering, which means development work. This development work refers to, or let's say, taps into particular religious values, groups, and networks to implement, improve projects of transformation. And at the
we still see the first slide. Is it a mistake?
Yes. I'll give you the other in a second.
Sorry.
Thank you. So to implement and improve projects of transformation, and at the same time, this policy influences the religious traditions it refers to. Incorporating with certain groups and highlighting particular values, these religious groups and values are promoted and others are not promoted. So development policy directly intervenes in the religious landscape of other nation states and tries to somehow shape, or let's say domesticate even, certain religious groups in and through cooperation. This may not be the aim of cooperation with some religious groups per se, but it is a consequence, or maybe an unintended consequence, as Eric just mentioned. And I show you my 5 points. This was the first point. The second point is more general. To understand religious traditions, values, or networks only as a useful tool to advance projects of sustainable development is a pragmatic approach, of course, but it also narrows the possibility to learn from other ways of knowing and seeing the world, and it prevents that development discourse is questioned. Development thinking, which still implies, of course, patterns of hierarchy, inequality, a comparison between the underdeveloped and the developed, this will not change, renew, or abandon if other people's practices and views are not understood on their own term, but only as instrumental for existing approaches. Looking at local aims and practices of transformation might help, this is the idea of our project, to better understand how those attempts to improve emerge in relation to ideas of mainstream development. This could make possible to acknowledge the ideas of, let's say, a Salafi organization to promote moral change and education as both an attempt to do change differently and as a critical reworking of development discourses. Take the example of a Salafi organization in Niger, studied by Hamisu Risaja, her doctoral student in our project. This group perceives an ongoing decay of moral order in Niger, similar to maybe what you experienced, Iris. And they work with the notion of tarbiyah, education in Hausa, which refers mostly to moral education and is seen as the basis for any other education. The enemy, let's say, of tarbiyah education is the hegemony of Western culture. This includes views, for example, on gender relations. But in the end, their long-term goal associated with moral education and change comes pretty close to ideals of what we might call good governance. Sorry, Hamisu, for oversimplifying, but I think this is my reading of it. So how could the capabilities and knowledges of religious actors really be recognized and not only used? And can uncomfortable partners, maybe like a Salafi organization, also need partners in a development framework that rather highlights shared values and consensus, as the religious actors in development paradigm usually does. My third point refers to context of religious plurality. Because I think taking religious actors seriously as civil society actors is just as important as taking any other civil society actor seriously. In cooperation with local religious actors, it is often emphasized, and Eric has mentioned this too, that they have a greater legitimacy in African contexts. However, this is, of course, depends. As a focus on religious groups, which are well known or have larger membership, risks to ignore the social political context of religiously plural societies, where religious groups fight for political recognition and where asserting legitimacy or questioning the other one's legitimacy is part of everyday business, and where access to international cooperation resources is an important currency in the struggle for local recognition. So in religiously plural contexts, it may be sometimes more fruitful to find either who is excluded and marginalized instead of supporting the dominant legitimate groups and religious leaders. Coming to my fifth point, it's also what Eric already mentioned, that many organizations do not only represent local civil society, but are closely connected to large international transnational bodies with their very own objectives and aims, be it the Catholic Church or Turkish state-affiliated Islamic NGOs.
You have 2 more minutes, Eva.
Yes, thank you. To use religious authorities and organizations as facilitators or to attribute more legitimacy to them than to local political structures, for example, could also undermine the sovereignty of the state in the long-term view. Ibrahim Bashir Abdullahi, also a doctoral student in this religious engineering project, works on Turkish soft power in Niger. And he shows how government agencies use the cooperation with Turkish religious organizations working in Niger, not only to make development work more sustainable, but also to better reach the local population to reinforce their political and cultural influence. And this is how I come to my fifth point. In the framework of development, economic environmental, social issues are increasingly discussed as moral duties. That's my impression. So this again can contribute, I think, to long-standing patterns of a kind of what has been termed the depoliticization of development. The turn to religion increases the moral turn in development, or maybe it's even a moralizing turn. Value-based development, as it is sometimes called, can imply that donors support only those who subscribe to the same values. This does not leave much room to hear the voices of those which use the religious idiom to express criticism of social and political conditions and to develop decolonial alternatives to development thinking. So in my view, one should not assume moral consensus just because a religious tradition also emphasizes helping the poor or saving the planet, to be very oversimplifying, but rather discuss how to deal with different points of view and different ways of seeing the world and different ways of transforming society. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks again for all the 3 inputs. Now we come to the responses, and I will invite as a first discussant Nabiela Farouk-Matius, please.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here speaking as a practitioner. I am having a background in Islamic studies, and I'm delighted to see my old professor Ulrich Rebstock also in the audience. But I'm speaking here as a practitioner from a governmental implementing organization, GIGA, and working in the field of religion and development for more than, specifically in this field, for more than 5 years. I share the importance of the topic and also the ambivalence it brings in. Specifically, when we talk about sensitive topics like family planning, contraception, we see that there is also a backside of a coin. But I would like to start with our role here as a governmental agency. Obviously, we as GIZ, we also work with religious actors only since 5 years. We have so in a systematic way. And you mentioned the difficulties and challenges with working with the diverse landscape of religious actors, and whether it should be not our role to work and deal with the different point of views. I agree that this will be very fruitful. At the same time, there are criteria for working together with religious actors, with faith-based organizations, when it comes to our kind of cooperation as a governmental body or as an organization which is working for the German government as an implementing organization. So I think the balancing of the SDGs and the norms and values is really key for us. And I found it very interesting. I would like to start with the first speaker, Damaris, when you mentioned the challenges specifically this is posing to the situation of girls in Kenya and in Africa. And I see specifically the background of the androcentric interpretation of religious texts and the role of men and women, which is dominantly focusing on the male perspective, which is shaping here the discourse. And for us to prevent this kind of agenda, we would like to seek as a standard in the selection for partners and actors, the respect for human rights standards and principles, but also a clear development orientation. It can't be our goal to work with agents who claim to have a moral high ground or to know what is best or better for the people on the ground. And certainly at the same time, we as a development organization, when we come into a context, we don't know best. We have to ask and seek for information. There has to be a religious actors mapping. There has to be an approach of do no harm to actually seek for a best solution on the ground. And we have these kind of tensions which need to be taken into account. So the scope conditions which were mentioned for how to work with religious actors, I would say are these where we find common ground, like where we see that we as a development actors and religious actors as being part of a bigger frame are working towards the same goal, there we can do this kind of work. But there are these risks and these unintended consequences, which were mentioned by Eva Spies. And I feel that on my personal maybe a personal note, that if working in development cooperation, obviously one has to see the roots of development cooperation in missionary work and also in colonial work, saying this on a personal note. And therefore, I think we really have to reflect on this and how we can do better when we want to work on this subject, better life for all of us in the future. I think I would like to end on this point and maybe continue later on.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I hand over to our second discussant, Daniel Salau-Boguet. Please.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to thank the presenters for a very rich and very relevant discussion topic we have had this afternoon. You know, talking about religion and development is, I think, quite relevant in the moments that we are in. And I'm giving my intervention from both a researcher and practitioner point of view. Before I went to the academia not a long time ago, I've been working with the development community-based organizations and involved in various development processes, both at the local and the national and international levels. And so issues to do with the Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, and these other processes that impact on developments per se, more from the community level perspective. I've been quite involved in that. But then also in my research work, including my doctoral work that I did, I was also looking at this in the sectionalities and the overlapping issues between the role of the church and the development actors in the community that I was looking at, and the Maasai community, where the churches continue to play a very significant role when it comes to development and, being consulted by development actors and, stepping in as leaders and making decisions at the community level, and also the government proactively engaging the church, more so in Kenya, where I've done a lot of my work, but also this is the same across many African countries. And from the presenters, I think we have received a very diverse and a very rich view and analysis of what is transpiring when the state and when the church and development actors, including the state, collide or intersect. And I think the first speaker, Damaris, raised a lot of very valid and very good points, as looking from the perspective of the girls and the gender issues in Kenya and what role the church is playing. Not only the church, but the faith-based actors generally, but I think mainly the church has been very proactive in that area. And I would like to, just pick a few issues. We also have a very big role of in as much as the church or faith-based organizations and the government policies are sometimes colluding when there's convenience, and sometimes also there's a conflict of the same. Occasionally they come together to agree, as they have done during the COVID-19 case, blaming the girls, and blaming the parents for the issues of pregnancies and all that. So they sometimes converge, but sometimes they also conflict in many cases. And we see the government sometimes blaming the churches, or faith-based organizations of maybe doing the mandate that is not theirs, or overstepping their mandate, stepping on the borders of what is supposed to be done by the government. But also we see the faith-based organizations doing this as a charity, or filling the gap and the vacuum that the government has failed to do. And this is not only on matters of social interest like sexuality and girls' moralization, as Damaris was putting it, but also on the matters of development. The faith-based organizations coming in to say we are doing what the government has failed to do. And most of the time the government feels that politically they have been discredited in the eyes of the communities, of the voters, of the citizens, that they have done, the church is doing what it's not supposed to be doing. And quite often we have seen sanctioning and of the activities by the state, especially in the current trend where especially now in Kenya and in other African countries, we are in the era of terrorism and all that. And so there's a lot of sanctions by the government on how these faith-based organizations are funded, how much they receive, what they are supposed to do or what they are not supposed to do. So that is one aspect of the conflicts that arise. But then also we see a convergence or the coming together at a point of convenience during the politicization and the electioneering periods, where of course, the governments and the state use faith-based organizations and churches to advance their political agenda. And in the recent trend, you will also observe, and I don't know how maybe the presenters have integrated that in, especially in Africa, where there is the issues of corruption, because I haven't heard that in any of the presenters, how maybe in the issue of corruption, how the state, there's an emerging trend where politicians take money to these faith-based organizations in form of offerings, in form of gifts, you know, and many people and political analysts and other citizens have been lauding that this is another form of money laundering, where money stolen from corruption deals are passed through the church for cleansing, sort of, and the church and faith-based organizations who have always been like the prefects of development or of the government work would be muzzled, you know, their voice from shouting out of any ills and any injustices in the government. And this also, to a greater extent, affect the development agenda of any country. And so these are key issues that have been emerging, and vis-a-vis the current trends that are happening when we are looking at religion and development in developing countries. But this also, we should be alive to the historical continuities, especially in Africa, where we are emerging from the history of colonization, and we know the role that the church has played, sometimes to advance the colonial agendas. And so this has also, in many places, and maybe that, I don't know whether the findings of Eric, these quantitative findings, have also found the differences, the context of the roles of these churches, of these faith-based organizations in different regions, because it is highly local and highly contextualized. Because in other areas, like where I've done my studies, my research in Mars Island, they just recently agreed to join, you know, the church or the faith-based organizations and use that as a platform for development because of the history that they have had with them during the colonial times, the fear of losing their cultures, and so in Africa, which is quite heterogeneous, as Eric had said, these faith-based organizations are performing different functions at different scales, at different levels, depending on the region and the communities that they are working in. So in some areas, it's quite advanced in the areas that they have worked in. In some areas, it is quite as recent as a few years ago that they have started to make inroads into the environments that they are working on.
You have two more minutes. You have 2 more minutes.
Okay, so okay, maybe I can end it there, but maybe the last point as I end it and pick it from there again is when we are talking of religion engineering, and this is the point that was raised by Eva Spies, I think it's also important maybe to look at the extent to which religion has shaped development, and also the way that the extent to which development has shaped religion. So who is engineering who? In the sense that also development, I think, have also shaped the thinking and the theory of religious organizations, and you know, move away from the faith and belief systems towards the contemporary development theories, as we know, being shaped by other international processes, discussions, and the discourse that's happening at a larger scale. So I think there is a lot of shaping going both ways. I don't know what the extent to which this is happening, but maybe it's the work that Eva Spies and the colleagues will continue maybe to establish. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks again for all those thought-provoking contributions, and also thank you for respecting our time frame. Now there's the opportunity for the contributors to react to each other. If you want to, Damaris, Erik, Eva, feel free to respond to the responses. After that, we can open the broader floor.
Yeah, I think I can go first. Thank you to our discussants. I think you raised very critical points. I want to respond to Nabiela. Not really a response, but just something that you said that piqued my mind. You know, how development, how religion shapes development, and how development is shaped by religion. And I think it's important that when we think about international development, we also need to rethink about the role of international organizations and the kind of impact that they are having in Africa, faith-based organizations. And I will demonstrate that with examples, which I was not able to do in my long presentation. In one of the larger studies I did for the Center for Reproductive Rights, one of the things that was very clear to me is that the resistance of faith-based actors on gender issues, on reproductive health rights, especially reproductive health technologies, on comprehensive sexuality education in Kenya and in Africa, in the 8 countries that I studied, was that this was also being shaped by developments in you know, can I call them evangelical conservatives in America and the rest of Europe. And I give examples, you know, hoping no one is going to look for me and shoot me. I'll name a few. Citizen Go, which is Madrid-based faith-based organizations, works very actively in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Uganda, in Mozambique, in Malawi and Zambia and Zimbabwe, to ensure that these conservative interpretations, you call it androcentric interpretation of scriptures, is moved into women's bodies. And Citizen Go has worked with faith-based organizations and faith-based lobby groups to take the government to court because of some certain textbooks that are being taught in primary schools because they promote sexuality or homosexuality, or because they'll make kids immoral or that sort of thing. And, you know, and I have been an observer of these issues. We have Marie Stop clinics in Kenya and largely in the East African region, which provide reproductive health support and technologies to especially vulnerable women. And we had Citizen Go, Family Watch International, all international faith-based allied lobbies, very powerful bodies, you know, petitioning up to the UN, up to the African Union, and locally working with local faith-based organizations and lobbies to actually close Marie Stop. And they carried, you know, there's just so much money that is coming into Kenya, especially where I'm familiar with, from Citizen Go, from Family Watch International, from doctors, Catholic doctors, that, you know, sponsor very expensive, what do you call them? They erected these large posters by the roadside to say abortion is murder, and, you know, whipping up public emotions against, you know, some of the things that they are against. And so when we think of international development, we must also think about the role of international faith-allied, faith-based lobbies and their impact on the African continent, and how they work together with local faith actors to ensure that they continue to entrench some of these teachings that are completely harmful to women and gender development. And Salau, yeah, corruption. You know, I just did an article on the elephant about church and money, and politicians taking corruption money to church to be sanctified, and how that is also shaping the voice of the church and also development in church. So there are all these dynamics that we could never exhaust here, but I think this conversation has started, you know, I think what this does is that it sets up real good conversations around some of those issues that are critically important. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, are there more responses to the responses? Please.
Sure. Happy to follow up, and thank you both, Nabiela and Daniel, for terrific comments. I like those a lot. Nabiela, I'm super happy to hear that the GIZ is now putting religion and religious actors high on the agenda, even though you mentioned it's only since 5 years, I believe. Which to me says that we should also not be too strict and have some patience with development organizations and the GIZ, for example, of learning and developing their ways of how to deal with this, right? So I think that's a very positive and good development. At the same time, though, I would just be curious and push you a little bit towards the moral values and the moral compass that you mentioned yourself, the common moral ground that needs to be there between development agencies and FBOs, and whether that's fully developed by the GIZ and other development agencies, right? Because at the end of the day, to give you an example, if you have a small-scale FBO that's doing terrific work and that shares those values, and you have a bigger nationwide FBOs that doesn't share those values to the same degree, but would be more effective in shaping development, what do you do as the GIZ, right? Who do you partner with? And if you choose to partner with the smaller one, are you ready to make bigger investments to help them scale up their territory and their activities, for example? At the same time, I think it's crucial, and that what we found, for example, in Burkina Faso, that FBOs should not really be overburdened with too many additional demands by external actors and international development agencies. So I think it's crucial to pick up on the expertise and the local knowledge of FBOs and help building on that, rather than asking, you're great at conflict mediation, but can you also do something about climate change and gender equality and so on and so forth? So I think that's another crucial point to consider, but really developing and being transparent about this moral compass to found that moral grounds is really crucial and something that needs future work in the upcoming years and months. And then also what Daniel said about the state sanctioning what it perceives as misbehavior by faith-based organizations, I think is really key and comes back to what we found regarding the state being either a partner for cooperation or a spoiler of sustainable development. I think that also speaks to the position of external international actors, meaning that if you find a highly repressive state, think about whether you want to partner with that state or with FBOs and send money, for example, rather to promising FBOs rather than to the states. And also the issue of corruption that Daniel mentioned, I think that is an issue that, for example, in my work, in my latest book, I encountered when looking at FBOs in Nigeria, for example, where some of the FBOs suffered a big blow by being involved in corruption, which basically destroyed their legitimacy among local populations, but also caused problems for international actors cooperating with those FBOs. So the issue of corruption, I think, is something to take into account and speaks again to the need of really taking into account local facts, local knowledge, and having open communication with local FBOs and choosing whom to partner with and whom not to partner with. And a final point that I want to make, which I think speaks to what Daniel called development shaping religion and religion shaping development, is it's not only about the states and FBOs cooperating, but also the relationship between FBOs amongst each other, right? Because they are competing amongst themselves as well. Some of them are, of course, cooperating. Some of them are in competition. And that competition is partly spurred by demands and requests of international development donors. So if there is a way to create more cooperation, both among FBOs on the local level and among development agencies on the international level, I think that will be a fruitful avenue for fostering the cooperation on both the local and the international level, and is something that needs more work in the future. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Also from my side, many thanks to the discussants and your contribution. It's very, very helpful. And also thanks Eric and Damaris. So I think I have very similar points. I wanted to take up actually also on what Sarah, you just mentioned this idea to what extent development has been shaped by religions, and so this is of course also a part, and I think this is also what maybe Nabila mentioned when she mentioned the colonial and the missionary context. But for our project and for us, it would be very interesting also to see how is not this only done in the past. How do religious organizations, actors shape development thinking in the past, but how do they do this today? And for me, this would be really a question coming back to this finding the common ground. So how much room for maneuver is there really to take in more ideas, different ideas, maybe also contradictory ideas of maybe development. And Eric, you mentioned common moral ground. I think Nabila, you only talked about finding common ground. So I would be really interested about this moral dimension, and if this is really a way forward for development work, and should we not? So if this is not too restricting, really to come with this kind of value-based package, and does it not narrow our or the approaches of, for example, Western cooperation agencies like the Gates or so, for cooperating and really making room for religious actors and other civil society actors, of course, to really shape development thinking. Yeah, maybe I leave it here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now there's an interesting conversation starting between the contributors, but I think at this point we should also invite the audience to join the discussion. And I would like to invite you to raise your digital hands in order to show that you want to contribute something. But there are already two questions that have arrived here via the chat, and I'm just going to read them out, and then yeah, we continue with those who just already raising their hands here. So there were two questions by Almut Notnagel. She asks to Damaris Pasitau, do you cooperate with the All-African Conference of Churches, the largest Christian faith-based organization in all of Africa, based in Nairobi, which has just recently started a sustainable population program and is organizing conferences on that issue, including reproductive rights of girls and women? And there's another question by Almut Notnagel to Erik Stollenberg. The Danish government supports faith-based organizations in all of Africa with programs such as Procmura, Program for Christian Muslim Relations in Africa. Can you name other faith actors who are involved in 4B? Damaris, maybe you go first.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with the work of the All African Conference of Churches. I know that recently they held a conference on harmful theologies. I was not part of that. I wasn't invited, so I know they do some amazing work, and my presentation focused on the negative tensions, but there's also I also know a number of faith-based organizations that really do amazing work around gender empowerment. So yeah, I'm alive to all those tensions, but I haven't personally worked with the All African Conference of Churches. What I do know and do is that I collaborate with people who are allied to the All African Conference of Churches.
Erik Stollenberg?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure whether I got the question right, so thanks, Ms. Notnagel. I'm not familiar with the program you mentioned by the Danish government, but thanks for the hinting me to that. I think I should check it out. But I would be happy to send you a whole list of faith-based organizations that we worked on. So please just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to provide you lists for Burkina Faso and Sudan and Ethiopia and other countries. But I honestly have to check out the program by the Danish government that you mentioned. So I'll do my homework and would be happy to continue the conversation with you. Thank you.
Now, before we continue with Ulrich Nitschke, first I have to ask Doris Löhr for another comment and question that arrived at her account. You're muted.
Okay.
The classical, sorry. So this question is from Shumet Andarje, whose speaker is not working, so he asked me to read out. It's a question to Eric. Would your research also analyze whether Christianity is playing different roles in promoting economic development in Western European countries and countries in sub-Saharan Africa? In other words, was Max Weber right in arguing Protestantism values tend to promote capitalism and eventually economic growth? Can we find evidence supporting this when it comes to Africa? That was it.
All right, shall I quickly respond or? Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna have to disappoint you because our project is not gonna compare Western Europe directly with Sub-Saharan Africa or countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. However, we will do further analysis on whether, for example, the share of Christians or Muslims in a country does matter for development, so religious demographics, for example. However, we're not going to do a thorough historical analysis that goes back to the deep roots of Christianity and Islam in multiple African countries, I'm afraid. So I don't think this answer is satisfactory for you because I can't provide the definitive answer, but I can only promise you that we are further going to drill down on the specifics or potential specifics that we may or may not find between larger Christian influences and larger Islamic influences in some of the countries that we are looking at, but this is further down the road, and I'm very happy to share those insights with you either personally via email or through a future upcoming event.
Okay, so thank you. Now Ulrich Nitschke, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited about the debate and thrilled to see the variety of participants in this webinar. I would like to raise a question a bit critical because my feeling is, why do we really focus on FBOs if it comes to common moral ground and let out governments and other NGOs who are under the same challenges of corruption? Also in Germany, actually, and we also have to realize that to a very large extent, development cooperation is, yeah, if I may say so, buying actually some trust sometimes via funding those kind of projects instead of developing the common ground first, which we should do actually. And that's one of my biggest criticism to my own tradition after 30 years in development cooperation, to look into a development that develops common ground first, agrees on values. You know, the sector program, when Abila and I were very much involved, is called Values, Religion and Development. And unfortunately, the BMZ skipped the terms values. I believe these values have to be fought on a daily basis for, human rights driven and all that. And then one can start common project in development cooperation. But this is my personal opinion. I would love to raise the question, why do we not include governments and NGOs, secular world, into the debate when it comes to allegations concerning corruption? Thank you very much. To all panelists, actually.
Yeah, thank you. I suggest that just anyone who wants to respond raises their hand, and then we can just continue with the other hands in the order they were raised. So Thank you for that. Or yeah, if you want to react immediately.
Yes, just I should mention that actually this is the basic idea of our project. So that what we call religious engineering, or this work on development, that it's not restricted to religious organizations and religious actors, but many actors who sometimes refer to religion, but are not themselves seeing themselves as religious actors, for example. So, but of course, and this is actually the main point I wanted to make. So let's discuss first what are this consensus we're talking about, and what are these values and so on, and not to use or instrumentalize religious actors and FBOs just to work on the approaches we already have at hand. That's just an addition to. Thank you for the comment. Actually,
yeah, thank you, Eva. Now, Eunice Kamara.
So thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity. I would like to begin by thanking, I'm trying to turn my video, but it won't work anyway. I'll do without it. So, well, it's worked. I would like to thank the participants, the presenters, and the respondents, I mean, for generating quite a number of interesting ideas, which is quite enlightening. So thank you very much. Secondly, I would like to make a few comments and ask one or two questions. Ordinarily, religion has functions and dysfunctions. So what Eric has said, that there's evidence either way, except for him, he found it, the evidence rather weak in terms of positive correlationship between religion and sustainable development. But that's something we always expect, that religion will have functions and dysfunctions. And in that sense, I would like to request Eva Space to make a few comments about the statement that a moral turn doesn't make development sustainable. Because I would expect that it would and it would not. It would make development sustainable, and it would make development sustainable depending on context and depending on issues. In the context of COVID, for example, maybe in Africa. In the context of COVID, maybe in Germany, it would be different, but just make some few comments to clarify that statement. And then Damaris Balsital, thank you for your presentation. You kind of ended up by saying that we need to focus more on sex education and sexual reproductive health rights. And I got taken a little aback because some study that you were doing here in Eldoret among adolescents in informal settlements suggested that it's not that these adolescents who are very vulnerable to gender-based violence in the context of COVID, including pregnancies, which you so ably talked about, were not ignorant. They knew quite a bit about sex education and reproductive health. And it's not that sex education therefore would be helpful. And then I'm thinking, rights, to have rights is one thing, but to fight for those rights and ensure they are not infringed on is a different thing altogether. We found many of the adolescent girls are living in, we were working in informal settlements. So we realized that with COVID, young girls, adolescent girls were trapped at home with, I don't want to use these terms, but it's rather offensive, but male predators, you know, like you are at home, there's nowhere you're going because there's COVID and there's lockdown, and you're in this one-roomed house. It's the bedroom, it's the kitchen, it's the sitting room, it's everything. And it is in that context that sexual abuse would take place. So you are like, no matter how much you give these girls rights, no matter how much education you give this is not going to work. You probably want to have a multi-pronged approach to this thing. And in the context of what I've said up to this point, I would ask any of the panelists and even the respondents to say what they think about inner sustainable goals. Because along the way, I had mention of relationships, for example. I had the issue of rights, and you can't talk rights, you can't talk morality, you can't talk very many things without thinking about inner sustainable development goals. Thank you very much.
Eva, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eunice. Of course, this is also to make a point. I said that a moral term will not help, but I see two dimensions in it. So the first is that when we talk or we shift the discussion to values and moral grounds and so on, so there is a tendency to depoliticize the discussion, and I think this is not actually helpful for a development debate where Western approaches and the Western world is very much in discussion now and thinking about decolonial approaches. So I think this is a political discussion, and to shift it to the morality, to the sphere of morality and values does not help really to bring this, to promote this more political discussion. And the other point, when I say that a moral term won't help, is actually the point Ulrich Nitschke already raised, in my understanding at least. So there is this tendency then that maybe donors or international development agencies support only actors who subscribe to the same values and the predefined values, actually. And there's no discussion about what are these values. And so there is something like an assumed consensus. And this is actually only putting up moral pressure and maybe in the end leading to hypocrisy, telling everybody, yes, of course, we support these kind of values. So I think a moral turn somehow veils more or is covers more of the challenges and problems than it's really helpful to discuss them. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can jump in to the question asked by Eunice. Eunice, thank you very much, and it's wonderful to see you again after a long time. Yeah, I have no doubt that the work you carried out with vulnerable girls in Eldoret, led to that kind of results. But I also know from my own experiences working with vulnerable girls in Maasai Land, is that many girls don't know what happens to their bodies because they have not had, first of all, sex is a taboo subject. In the community in which I work in, people don't discuss about, parents don't discuss matters to do with sexuality with their children. Of course, fathers would not even dare, mothers don't. And so these girls, especially in Maasai Land, and let me just tell you one thing. One of the biggest downside for me in 2020 is that I lost so many girls under my care to teenage pregnancy, which normally means that those girls will not come back to school. So it's very personal for me. The thing that I realized as a researcher of religion is that and going through the kind of messaging, church messaging, religious leaders messaging around sexuality and purity culture, particularly with Pentecostals that I work with, there was actually no evidence in my my study that those moral messages prevented teenage pregnancy or prevented some of those tensions that I have talked about. studies from the UN, particularly in Asia, and Eunice, I can send you that document that also suggests that while religious messages did not, support prevention of teenage pregnancy, the reverse is true, that comprehensive sexuality education enabled young pubescent and adolescent girls to gain the tools to understand their reproductive health and to understand what is happening in their bodies. But what I found is that there is a moralization, there's a spiritualization, and there's a kind of a demonization of what is happening to young girls, and nobody is speaking about what those girls are going through in their own bodies, and no one is empowering them to be able to understand that. So that's why I found the tension, Eunice, and I know it's different for girls in upper middle class families in towns, but for girls in rural areas where there isn't even, I mean, the distance to school is like sometimes 25 kilometers. That is a different scenario that I'm dealing with. So I appreciate that, and I'm going to look at that from those perspectives. But studies also are coming up with all these kinds of issues that we are grappling with.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly add on?
Yes.
Just briefly on Eunice's Camara's point and what Damaris just mentioned. I think it's, I was presently surprised, I have to say, that our quantitative analysis showed that for freedom of religion or belief is correlated with higher degrees of gender equality, right? I think that's good news, because oftentimes the argument is through greater freedom of religion or belief, we can multiply the forces in a society that work towards sustainable development. And there is at least preliminary evidence that that seems to be the case for gender equality. And I think that's particularly challenging more negative or conservative arguments that often claim religion and religious organization promote only conservative values when it comes to gender equality. But on the other hand, our qualitative data also shows, for example, that in Burkina Faso, there are really great efforts by FBOs to educate women and young girls about their rights, about pregnancies, and so on and so forth. And I think that's something to pick onto, and also potentially a topic that is not on the screen of international development agencies that much so far when it comes to FBOs.
Thank you. Now, Hamisu.
Thank you, Prof. Paula. Thank you, all speakers and respondents, those who provide responses. I would like just to comment on the question raised by Daniel regarding the question of corruption. In my ongoing work with a local Salafi association in Niger, I realized that really this association is working to change the mainstream of being civil servant in Niger, for example, to fight against corruption by referring to the ethics of being Ahl Sunnah. What does it mean to be Ahl Sunnah, which is a kind of moral compass, which, if I can borrow the term by Eric, so it is like this moral compass that they are using to sensitize and to educate people through this lens of tarbiyah that Eva Space has just presented. So I can conclude by saying that these local actors are aware of this question of corruption, and they are doing what I call changing from outside perspective, like acting on the behavior of people by referring to a certain moralities informed by some religious identity in order to change the society. Another question, a question I would like to raise, it is addressed to Damaris. At the beginning of her talk, she was asking under which conditions faith-based organizations activities can be sustainable. So I would like to ask her if she can provide me with some example about activities that can be seen as sustainable. Yeah, in according to her research. Thank you very much.
You want to respond, Damaris?
Yeah, and I don't even have an answer in my fingertips. I know for sure that the history of democratization in Kenya, especially, and I think the larger African, sub-Saharan African region, is tied to the role of churches and civil society in ensuring that African churches, African nations gained democracy. Also that many of the faith-based organizations, from the 80s onwards, the 80s to I think to the tail end of the 90s, were really the voice of the voiceless and the conscience of the nation. And there was an element in which Kenyans felt that as long as faith-based leaders were able to speak about corruption, speak about democracy, speak about human rights, speak about services, public services, and that sort of thing. I think history will remember that as one particular role in which faith-based organizations really contributed to the democratization of post-independence countries in Africa. And I can speak about many others. Risa, I think that's your name. And I think I can send you an article on the role of faith-based organizations in development in Kenya. And so probably I didn't answer you, but at least I said something that can pique your interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Nabila, you had to wait for quite a time. So.
That's all right. I wanted to thank firstly Damaris for sharing her experience as an activist and also as a researcher on this very sensitive and also worrisome topic of how girls are treated in many parts of the world and how religion plays a role in this. And I was probably too diplomatic saying that there is an androcentric worldview and therefore this happens. But obviously, we have a problem here, and for a reason, UNFPA is lacking money. And this is not only when we talk with faith-based organizations, but also in politics. The body of women is also always mean of politicization. And I would like to depict shortly, as I mentioned earlier, Eric, you said the German government is working, I actually said it and you were referring to it, the German government, the Ministry of Development Cooperation is working on religion development since 2015. And we were not the first, or the German government was not the first who was working on the subject. The World Bank, the UN, there were many institutions who were figuring that religion plays a really important role, and it is a very ambivalent role. But we have to start a conversation on a systemic and strategic level, and therefore, this sector program, where I was working for more than 5 years, was founded in order to advise the German Ministry of Development Cooperation, and at the same time, there was a multi-actors partnership founded. Its name is PART. PART is a multi-actors partnership where we have governmental bodies as well as the World Bank and a lot of FBOs and academia who come together to discuss these important questions we're also raising here today. And the need to actually have this larger conversation about religion development, as I feel was sensed within our project, was that religion is there, and we cannot just, we have to acknowledge it as a fact that whether we like it or not, it's there. It's also there in Germany, and we have to handle this. And when we come to development cooperation, it's important to leave no one behind. Therefore, many people, they are affected, they think because of religion a certain way, and faith actors, religious organizations, they come into this play, and it is needed to consider them and see them in their in the whole range they're offering, in all the different aspects they bring in. And I found it very important to say what you said, Ulrich, that obviously the higher ground, I mean, there's no higher ground neither for governmental organizations nor for faith-based organizations or civil society. I think it's always the same. It's a question, how do we work? Do we promote for good? And we should judge by this. And working for GIZ, when you were asking about what kind of values, what is the common ground for us? I mean, obviously, we work as a governmental organization, and we have a mission statement, and there you can see, as a federal company, we are guided by the principles of our societal order and the interests of Germany. And this is how we operate. And obviously, we advance by this also development policy, which is supported by the German government. And then we have the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. But I think it's also, yeah, maybe important to state this more clearly, that yeah, this is where we come from, and this is why we work in this context. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There are two more questions. I suggest that we combine them, because we're running out of time now, but there should be room for each of them to be posted. And then maybe there are a couple of minutes left for others to respond, to react to it. So first, Dorothy Kitzer-Zentler, and then Hans Spitzek, please.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. And thank you all, the team, for organizing this important event on the topic which I've been really longing for. I come originally from Uganda, but I stay in German. And this is a topic which I also wanted to organize with my team, Chat Meet Uganda. And I think this is an encouragement for me to organize it in the future, near future. We work, we do open events on sustainable development goals. I just want to comment and thank Dan Damans for what he presented, what he said, or especially on the girl child, what's really happening. What I'm going to mention about is the observation which things which I've been observing for a long time, most of my life. When I was at the age of 17, I was in a school, a Catholic school, and this Catholic school was under church, which where priests used to meet at different times. And at the time, I saw it that the church did a lot for development, but on the other hand, they do a lot for keeping people in poverty on one side. Just not the church as itself, but maybe the leaders, personal people who, the morals, I would say the morals of some leaders. This is the church where the priest, at one time you had to go for holidays. The girls, it was a boarding school. The girls had to travel, and we had to sleep over at the priest's place, because I didn't go for holidays at home, but I had to go to my friend's place. We slept over at a priest's place, and in the night it was just party. And some of these girls, really one of them hides with me in the room, said she's not going to the party because what's going on there, she doesn't like it. And just to note what was really going on was not really good. And these are the leaders, the priests, some of the priests who are even paying school fees for these girls. So the parents trust them, but what goes with the girls was really very not good. I'm just giving this as an example. At the age of 17, I noticed this, and it was really disturbing. Later on, I have noticed also in the church, what also Damas talked about, the man of God. which are commonly called in Africa. In Germany, I haven't really seen that much, but in Africa, you hear man of God, but what some of them, what they are going through or what they do with the girls, it's all women. It's really, really not acceptable. These rights, talking about women's rights, some of them, they don't know about their rights. So always talk about the rights. The girls have to know, to be told about the rights. Some of them, they don't know the rights that they can say no. Thinking of the man of God had said something, so they think this person, they go on the social, they work, they use words that anyone could believe what he says is right and whatever they have to do. And that's fine, it's very wrong. And you find that most of these girls, some of them don't make it. They end up with pregnancy or with so many other things, even dropping out of school, or so many things happen to these girls. That is deep, for me, it is underdeveloping, brings also to underdeveloping in the society, a big, especially when these people have to do a lot with a large group of people. Another thing which was also noted, the church also lobbying some industrial products. For example, genetically changed seeds are usually brought in Africa, and most of them, they are given out to the churches, and the church give out to the farmers. Farmers know normally in the villages, it is so that they keep some seeds to grow them the next season. So in the next season, because the seeds are genetically changed, they don't reproduce. They can't use them again. So there comes famine. People will not be having and they're not told what the seeds are good because they really bring good produce, but the seeds are not really good as the original seeds. So that's one of the things. Another thing is also in the medicine. So many churches also lobby for vaccination. They use church goers to come to be vaccinated on different things, but some of the things which have been noticed is like women, they're not even told that the vaccine which they are taking is not for family planning. So they end up having problems, even at home, being checked. Traditionally, some of them, they don't produce, and they have problems with the families that they don't give birth to children. And this is some of these things has been noticed in some churches. So the church does a lot, but the leaders, the morals, there must be a hand of check. And this is not there. It will really be good if there is a check on the different churches and their behaviors and the leaders. So these morals also has really to be checked on. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing this out. Yeah. So we're actually run out of time, but I think I would like to also include Hans Spitzek and then again Daniel Salau-Roguet, and then we have to conclude.
Yeah, good afternoon. Very interesting, and the presentations from Kenya, from Bayreuth, and from Hamburg GIGA. I see and understand there's a warning to overstressing on the moral turn, and Stoltenberg said we should not overburden the FBOs, and thank you very much for that. I want to pick on it and to ask, is it possible to cooperate with religious actors or FBOs, if you want so, without theological discourse, if it is intended to use the transformative potential of faith? I put the question from the background of being working with the Evangelical Church in Germany for years in the development cooperation. So I'm a churchman, and I just want to say a word to my predecessor. I'm upset as well with the misuse of the word of God. I'm upset with the domination which we see in churches. And so churches and religious groups are not homogeneous. We have to differentiate and to look whom we are cooperating with. And is it possible to discern actually without applying theological discourse?
Thank you for this comment. And now our last contribution. Daniel Salau-Roguet. You are muted again.
You're muted.
Okay, and now? Okay.
Yep.
That's fine.
All right, so I just brief comments in the form of a conclusion and probably providing some insights on the way forward to help the three presenters and the team continue crafting this very important but very complex topic as well, because both religion and development are quite complex topics, and both of them are really contested in different perspectives. And I even what you saw is sustainable development makes it even, add a little bit of complexity into also the topic. And this has been captured by Eunice Kamara when she was trying to show the difficulty of guaranteeing maybe girls' safety in places that are informal, I mean informal settlements and all that, and that alludes to the element of development. And we want to ask ourselves maybe, what is development and in whose perspectives and in whose terms are we defining that term? I think that is very, very critical. Because what could be development to some others might not be development to others, depending on where and the context that we are defining that. And the correlationship between the development and religion, and maybe Eric in his work will continue probably to tell us how maybe sometimes if there is high religiosity in places with low development and vice versa, and what contributes to that, because where there is a lot of poverty, there is a lot of tendency of having a lot of religious beliefs and all that, and the beliefs that belief and that faith will take you out of poverty. But when sustainable development is achieved, as we see maybe in the Western world, then the level of religious beliefs tends to go down. I don't know how you can probably make that comparison. And then maybe also the role of the private sector when it comes to development. Because when we say development actors, we tend to look at the NGOs and the government, but also we have the private sector that is increasingly coming into the arena of development, and how this also impacts on the religious, faith-based organizations. And then the issue of culture, as I mentioned earlier, especially when we are talking about values and morals, where do we place the morals, especially from the indigenous people's perspectives? The assumption we are making here is probably the beneficiaries of development are all maybe subscribed to certain form of faith, but we know that there is a huge chunk of communities that are culturalists, that believe in traditional way of doing things. Where do we place that in this discourse, in these discussions? And then again, to Eric, still maybe when we talk of faith-based organizations, maybe also another comparative of maybe the Islam faith-based organization and the Christian faith-based organizations. We know the context in Africa varies a lot, because we know Islam and Islam faith-based organizations probably in the North Africa existed for a long time, probably even before colonialism. But we know that the church is a recent phenomenon, maybe coming with or slightly after or during the process of colonialism. So maybe those are the issues that I would want to point out to be as food for thought for the team to continue maybe thinking through as they craft together, put together this very, very important debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these concluding remarks. I think this is definitely a discussion to be continued, so I will not even try to sum it up now, but instead thank again everyone for their wonderful contributions for this really inspiring discussion. Yeah, many thanks. Thank you for staying with us for almost 2 hours, and hope to see you again, maybe even physically. Have a nice evening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me thank you very much,
Thank you.
panelistas and the chair and the discussions. And it was really wonderful, and especially Eva Spies, to invest all the time and to have you around. And on behalf of the cluster and the GIGA, I'm looking forward to more interesting collaborations and formats. And yeah, thanks a lot.